Hello, I'm Odin, and today I'm going to be making a large sword without power tools. Is Ichigo's Zangetsu sword from Bleach? I looked at a lot of images from both the manga and the anime, and honestly, the Zangetsu is not drawn consistently. The back curve of the blade changes. Sometimes it's pointier at the front, sometimes it's more up at the handle. So I'm going to base my version from the first appearance of the blade. All right. I want to make this project without using any power tools, except maybe a heat gun. And I'm going to draw my pattern directly on a piece of 6mm EVA foam. The blade is 1.75 meters long, and knowing that lets me mark how deep the curve I need on the back, and I can figure out how long each of the parts are. I don't want to just draw the curve of the blade freehand, it would probably look off. So I use a clamp on the table to hold the edge of one of my larger rulers. And then I flex it to get a long, gentle curve that meets the sword tip and the high point in the center of the curve. My measurements of the video frame tells me that the shoulder blade is 19 centimeters, and the color split of the blade runs right down through the middle of it. I mark the points on the shoulder and then flex the ruler again and make the next two curves. After drawing out the grip and the notch, I can cut out my first piece, which is also going to be my pattern. When I cut the back of the blade and all around the grip, I hold my hobby knife at a 90-degree angle. But for cutting the actual edge of the blade, I'm going to use the Krause Tools Angle Cutter. It's designed to help you consistently cut at a 45-degree angle. This is the first time that I've used this tool, and it seems to work really well. Now my line was a little wavy, but for my very first cut, I'm pretty happy with it. All right. I use this piece to trace the other side of the blade, and I'm able to get both halves from a single sheet of 6mm foam. I've got my first piece that I've drawn out and I've cut out, and I'm very happy with the shape that it is. This is the masterpiece. Gonna keep that. The secondary piece, I want to cut out the blade to exactly the size that I want because it's an angled cut, so that one needs to be right. All the other edges, I want to cut bigger than I need. That way, when I come back and glue these together, I can line up with the one cut, and I only have to follow one edge and get that exactly right. And then all the others, I'll trim to match this piece, because trust me, gluing two pieces that are exactly the right size together exactly the right way the first time is still hard for me to do. Another long angle cut. Now I gotta remember to cut these bigger than I need. And I leave some generous extra foam outside of my cut lines that I can trim back later. Tracing the pattern didn't get me the center blade line, so I draw that again just like I did before with my long ruler and a clamp. My plan for that center line is to cut a groove in the foam, but not all the way through it. I want to make the foam kind of peak at a fold and not have a seam. I practiced a few times with the angle cutter and some scrap first, setting the blade cut depth so it doesn't cut all the way through the foam. And then I go for the big cut. And I was happy to see that I didn't need to adjust the blade depth for each angle. I just have to flip the guide on the cutter from 90 degrees to 45 degrees and then back again. Now, if you don't have one of these Krause tools, you can always just cut a block of wood or even possibly build a wedge from some Lego out of 2x2 sloped bricks that are on a 45, or at least really close anyway. I will still need to trim this side. My cuts don't meet up inside of the foam. Is this whole length messed up like that? I learned that I needed an extra piece to help with the edges, so I didn't just cut through the foam on the ends. The second side went much better. It really worked the way I wanted it to. Ooh. So I can give me my, oh yeah, it is, that's gonna be fine. The foam sheet wasn't long enough for the entire piece, so I add some extra to get the length that I want for the grips. And they're gonna be covered with some fabric later anyway. Any foam sword I make needs something inside to help it be stiff and not just some floppy foam. And this time, I'm going to use some plastic garden stakes. My plan is to tape them together with hockey tape. The glue will actually stick to hockey tape, and binding them together will actually make them stronger. And because they are metal coated with plastic, I can gently bend them into the shape that I need for the blade. And I'm going to use just a single stake to get out to the tip of the sword. The stakes are almost 10 millimeters thick. I need foam to go all around them. That's the thickness it is. So this is the thickness that I need it to be. And I only have that little piece left, so I'm gonna have to make this one work. The other one's not gonna work. I need this. All right, fine. First, I glue the stakes down. This is why I used hockey tape, because contact cement will stick better to that tape than to the green plastic. Then I cut up my foam into smaller pieces and glue them around the stakes. It's okay if these are a little bigger, because I'm going to trim them back later. What I want is this part of the blade to be the right thickness. The cutting edge is going to be tapered to a point. And it looks like the stakes are going to work just fine. Okay, now, how do I want to do this? I'm going to need to add something between the blades as they taper down to the cutting edge so they don't just mash flat. I'm going to use strips of 2mm EVA foam. What if I do a big strip and a little strip on this guy, and a big strip and a little strip on that guy, and then glue them together? Even if they don't touch, it should stiffen this up. I'm going to cut 2 strips of 2mm foam that go from 6 centimeters down to 2 centimeters. And they're going to be thin enough that I don't need to cut them with the curve. I can just force them into shape when I need to. And for the second layer, I cut a strip that goes from 3 centimeters down to just 1. And to be safe, I'm going to cut one more tiny strip as well, which makes a total of 5 layers, as these are all 2mm thick and the middle foam around the stakes is 10mm. I want the back of the blade shoulder to look solid, so I cut a wedge of 10mm foam and fit it in there. I apply contact cement to the 4 big strips and the blade halves, and I give them about 10 minutes to dry. Then I can carefully stick them down to the inside of each blade half. And I'm bending the strip as I go so I can follow the curve of the blade. I glue up the smaller strips and lay them in next. And I'm going to go from large to small because I'm trying to keep the outer skin as flat as possible, because I don't want the finished blade to look like it has shallow steps. And I might need to use the tiny one as well, so I'm going to glue it in last. I realized the stakes may be just short enough that they could cause a dent in the back, so I filled them in with some foam too. I've got all my layers put on, and I'm ready to glue the 2 blades together, and I want to specifically do just the 2 blades. I'm going to put glue on this blade edge and on that blade edge. I'm not going to put glue along the back of the blade at all yet, because I don't want those to stick together until I'm ready for them to stick together, and I think it's just a little too much to try and do all at once. While applying the contact cement, I realized the upper portion of that blade, it kind of opened up a little when I moved it around. So I add some paper tape to squeeze them back together. I didn't glue the sides of the foam, I just glued the foam directly to the stakes. This is the trickiest seam of the project. I need to stick the halves together. That's easy, but while doing that, I can't stretch or pull one side more than the other, because that'll cause the blade to curve. And I almost got it perfect. Almost. I actually apply pressure to the cutting edge, closing that seam up as much as I can. That's working the way I want it to. And that's the side I'm most concerned about. Well, I'm concerned about both sides, but alrighty. So now, I need to glue up this. Okie dokie then. I apply glue to both halves of the upper blade, all the way to the grip, and balance the thing so the sides can dry while they're open. Now don't worry if you don't have these special metal 1, 2, 3 blocks. Books would work just as well too. I start at the widest point and slowly make my way up the grip, and then across the length of the blade. I did all these internal layers because I wanted a factory finish of the foam on the outside. That way there's no need for excessive sanding with a palm sander. Trim off the extra foam following the first layer that I had cut out. And it's so much easier to do it this way than to line up a bunch of pieces that are cut right and make them fit perfectly every time. Cutting out the inside of the rounded notch was not easy, so I wrap a piece of sandpaper around a wooden dowel and sand it smooth. I also sand the back of the blade and, well, all the edges I cut, just to make them a little nicer. I did tear the bending seam near the tip, probably where that 5th middle layer actually stopped. So I applied some super glue to seal it back up. And I used some accelerator spray as well, and I'll sand it smoother once it's fully set. I also super glued the very tip. This had too many tiny little pieces to actually fit together right. Some super glue and a trim, and they're ready to go. And the heat gun. Okay, So this is a power tool, but it's optional. I like the smoother finish I get when sealing the foam with the heat. So if you don't have a heat gun, you can always skip this. It's still gonna work. I spray the entire blade with a couple of coats of black PlastiDip spray. It's still what I use for a primer coat because I can find it at most big box hardware stores. I run a piece of blue tape along this edge to keep the back black while I can spray the blade part silver. And I cover the rest of it with paper so I can keep the back clean and not have any overspray. I was careful to keep the edge of the tape stuck down, and I had no paint bleeds from under the blue tape. I have a linen ribbon that I'll use for the grip cover. First, I cover the grip with Mod Podge. This will stick the linen down. Then I carefully wrap the handle with linen, not allowing the fabric to roll over on itself and using just one strip of the cloth. I cut a little piece to cover the other end and then wrap it over the edges. The Zangetsu sword from Bleach. This sword has many different variations throughout all the different series, possibly even more forms than what Cloud has with his sword in Final Fantasy. But I wanted to make this one, the first one that gets called out by name, because this is how Odin makes. Okay, so I've got all the layers laid on. This is pretty much what I wanted, and thankfully, it's doing really good for being a foam sword that doesn't wobble like a piece of shit. I want to thank Thomas Hulse, Tob Snob, and all of my Patreon supporters. You guys really do make this show possible. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe. Have an idea for something for me to make? Please leave a comment below. And if you make any of these projects, you can send me a picture.